Tit. The court is now back in session. Without further ado, we would like now to hand over to the prosecution to continue questioning the witness. Co-prosecutor. Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Nong Sopang again. This morning, you provided some information to us, but I would like to pose a few more questions to you as follows. Prior to 1975, were you aware whether a telegram office was ever established? Response. At each base, zone, and sector, and every unit of a division, there must be a communication section and telegrams for each zone and division. Question. Prior to 1975, again, did you ever receive any telegrams from a foreign country? Response. No, I didn't. However, I perhaps could be wrong, but in my section, I don't remember having received such messages or telegrams from a foreign country. Question. Now my next question is about the period of time after 1975, which is after the 17th of April 1975. When did you come to Phnom Penh? Response. I came to Phnom Penh after the city had already been prepared and organized. It was late 1975 when I got there and moved to this new location. Question. Who ordered your relocation to Phnom Penh? And could you describe what Phnom Penh was like when you came? Response. Pon, who was the team leader, was the one who ordered all these. He assigned me to come to Phnom Penh. When I reached Phnom Penh, I noted that the city was very quiet. It was empty of the population. It was not as populated as Phnom Penh these days. Question. When you arrived Phnom Penh and you stated that it was perhaps by late 1975, where were you located at that time? Response. My office was at the Sotiru school. Question. What was your role at that time? Response. I was a school teacher. I was in charge of providing training to people who could have been sent from various provinces. I had to train them on how to understand writing, reading, and typing. And I also was tasked with teaching them to understand some Latin letters and English. And gradually, I also taught them to decode secret telegrams. Apart from teaching, I also decoded telegrams sent to me by Mr. Pon. Question. When you were teaching children, how old were these children? And what was the motive behind training these children on decoding the telegrams? Response. The main motive for teaching them was to ensure that these children acquired some skills to serve the party to the future. In particular, they needed to be trained on decoding telegrams and typing. All of these were important as part of their skills so that they could perform these work to serve the party. These children mainly were 12 years old. Question. I may need to seek some clarification. You said that the children were about 10 to 12 years old, and the telegram were decoded or were written in code, secret code. Were co-prosecutor mic was not activated, and the interpreter could not hear his last part of the question. Response. I did not know further than that. I was supposed to provide trainings to them so that they received these skills. I do not know whether Angkar used them for military purposes or for civilian purposes. It's up to Angkar. It's none of my business. Question. Apart from teaching, did you perform any other tasks? Yeah, indeed, you said already that apart from teaching, you was decoding the telegrams. But what else did you do? And how many people worked under you? Response. The staff who were capable enough after receiving some trainings were about few people only. There were about 40 children who were trained at that time, but people who could decode the telegrams, there were only a few of them. Question. Were these few people working under you? You said that these few people worked under you. What about those who worked above you? Response. Pon and Tae were the two people who supervised me. Question. I would like to also seek some clarification. Did you ever engage in performing or sending the or typing the telegrams yourself? Response. I did not do this on my own. Question. I thank you very much indeed. I have only one of the final questions to put to you. My question is, who was the head of the telegram section in Phnom Penh? Response. The head of the telegram section on top of me at that time were Pon and Tae. These people were the most senior people in the telecommunication sector of the CPK at that time. Co-prosecutor, Mr. President, thank you. I have no further questions. The President, International Co-prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, Your Honours, good afternoon, Council, and good afternoon to you, Mr. Non Sepang. Allow me also to thank you on behalf of the co-prosecutors for being here today to assist us in learning more about your work from 75 and 79 and in ascertaining the truth in this case. I'm going to start my questions first by briefly clarifying just a couple of the areas that you've mentioned so far, and then we will move on to questions about your work in Phnom Penh in much more detail. You explained to us earlier that there were communications via telegram from zones, bases and battlefields to the upper authority, and of course that you helped translate some of these telegrams. My first question is, do you recall, starting with zones, do you recall which zones were reporting in the period that you were working at B20?
Thank you. The zones and armies who were reporting to the upper authorities. Let me ask for clarification first. Are you referring to the period before 1975 or after 1975?
Yes, indeed, the period prior to 1970, April 1975, prior to April 1975.
Before 1975, the units that sent the telegrams to the upper authorities included the special zones, East Zone, North Zone, Northeast Zone, Northwest Zone, West Zone, and Southwest Zone, as well as 3 other autonomous regions, namely Pravihir, Mundulkiri, and Siem Reap Odor Mien Chay. As for armies, only His Excellency Son Sen, who had direct communication with the leaders at the upper authorities. However, others did not have that authority to come and communicate directly with the upper authority.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. Returning to the zones, how were you able to understand from a telegram, for example, that it came from the East Zone, still staying with the period before 1975?
But response. Normally, the telegrams had secret code numbers. So all the telegrams we receive contained numbers, code numbers, but there were headings of, or the letterheads. For example, they had NR and then number, and then it followed by CK. CKs refer to the number of orders of the telegrams, and then underneath it there was the date, and finally there was an indication of the direction in accordance with the specified code number. For example, the east zone with the code number A75. That is for east zone. So whenever I saw A75, I immediately knew that it was meant for the east zone.
Thank you. Who was it that allocated those numbers, A75 to east zone and another number for a different zone?
Response. Those secret code numbers were planned in advance by Pon and I. At that time, we decided to assign code numbers for each zone. Actually, this specific code number was not the exact number. I only brought it up as an example only.
Thank you. And just a couple more questions on that period before April 75. Could you recall for us how often, on average perhaps, how often each zone would report to the upper level?
Response. As far as the telegrams were concerned, the frequency of telegram communication depended on the actual situation of respective zone. For example, if there were contentious battles, then the telegrams were sent 24 hours around the clock. But for zones that were already liberated, then the telegrams communication was less frequent. For example, the East Zone had to communicate very often. It had to operate 24 hours a day, and in other areas where war were breaking up, then there were a lot of communication.
Again, in that period, if we can look at the numbers from a different perspective, on average, how many incoming telegrams would you have translated per day, and then how many outgoing telegrams per day, if you can recall?
Response. I do not recall that well because it was a long time ago, but the frequent telegrams communication, as I said, it depended on the situation. At certain points of time, I had to work the whole day and night in order to sent those telegrams out.
Now, for the telegrams that were being sent from the upper level, is it also the case that there were telegrams to all of the zones that you mentioned earlier? I just want to make sure we have that correct. Were there also telegrams from the upper level to each of the zones and sectors and the military that you mentioned earlier?
I am afraid I do not understand your question. Could you please clarify it?
Indeed, and my apologies, it was confusing. We talked about the incoming telegrams, and you said they came from the various zones, and you listed the zones and autonomous sectors. And I just want to ask whether there were also telegrams being sent from B20 to each of those zones and sectors that you mentioned.
Response. The outgoing telegrams were not as frequent as the incoming telegrams.
Now, moving forward in time, you described how at one point the unit was split into two. One group remained at B20, and you were in that group, I think you said. And another group, or PON, moved to the front line west of Phnom Penh. Do you recall when that happened? Was it in 1974? Was it late 1974? Was it early 1975? Do you have any recollection of the time?
The division of my unit into two back then was done in late 1974.
And when PON left and headed to the west of Phnom Penh, do you recall who he went with?
Response. I do not know, but what I knew at the time was that PON was close to Pol Pot. So wherever Pol Pot went, he would bring PON along with him.
And when PON left, do you know which location west of Phnom Penh he moved to?
Response. That I do not know.
Very well. And after he left in late 1974, was he, or Pol Pot, still able to communicate via telegram from that new location? west of Phnom Penh.
បាទ
Response. I stayed at the rear, and at the front line, Pon was there. So whatever message or instruction Pol Pot wanted to send to me, he could communicate with me 24 hour over 24 hour.
And how did Pon communicate with you? Was it via telegram or was it in a different way?
Response. My communication with Pon was through secret telegrams. We did not have access to telephone. We used Titita or Morse
ប្រភេទ
to communicate with him. So we communicated through secret code numbers, and if it was the information about the victory from the battlefield, then my section or unit at the rears would prepare the report of the victory and submit it to the broadcasting unit in order for public broadcast.
And I'll just ask you a follow-up question. Did I understand correctly that when victory was achieved in Phnom Penh, that was communicated by secret code via telegram to you, and you then decoded that message for public broadcasting? Did I understand correctly what you were telling us earlier?
សុំទោសអានេះវាខ្សោយ
I am sorry, I don't think that the voice is getting through my headset. Can anybody check my headset?
I'll repeat my question. Thank you. I think you said that Pon communicated to you via coded telegrams in relation to a victory on the battlefield, and you then decoded that message for public broadcasting. My question is, was that a message about the victory of the 17th of April, or was it a number of different messages?
បាទ
Response. The telegrams were classified into two categories. The first category was about secret telegrams, and the other one was an open message. The victory, the message about victory was not in the secretive forms. It was in a public form, so we did not use any code numbers. We simply used the Morse code. So I did not have to translate it or decode it. I simply prepared into Khmer version and then forwarded it to the broadcasting unit.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Do you recall, just on that message, do you recall if that was received by you and then broadcast on the 17th of April, or was it after that date?
Response. Well, at that time, we did not have advanced technology, so it was not that fast. We did not broadcast it immediately upon our victory. I remember that it was 9:30 when the victory was claimed, but actually the message to me, message reached my unit at about 10 or so. So I had to prepare written documents to submit to the broadcasting unit. So it was not in a very timely manner, and I was also blamed that I was belated in pronouncing the victory of the Democratic Cambodia. So at that time, there was some 1 or 2 hours delay. To my recollection, the public pronouncement on radio of the victory was made sometime around 11.
And we are discussing the 17th of April 1975. It was on that date.
Sorry, it was not the telegram, but it was the victory news or the pronouncement of victory. It had nothing to do with secret telegrams, but it was the announcement of the victory gained in Phnom Penh.
Thank you. And just one more question, at least for now, on pre-75. In your statement, you described your assignment in 1973 by Hong, and you talked about this earlier as well. And this assignment, of course, was to B-17. Now, I will just give the relevant ERNs and ask you a very brief question. This is document E3/64. The ERNs are in Khmer 00328023, French 00411-694, and English 00334-042. And I will just read a part of this passage and then ask you what you meant by it. Quote, in 1973, the Committee of Pre-Vihia sector named Hong appointed me to work at the Party Central Committee called B-17, which was a tempering place whose work included food production. I just wanted to ask how it was that you knew that B-17 was an area or office associated with the Party Central Committee at that time.
Response. When I was sent there, I did not know that B17 was related to the party central committee, but I learned it from Mr. Hong who educated me at that time, that I was to be sent to the center office. I had to travel on foot, and it took me 1 month to reach B17. And when I got to B17, I did not go anywhere else. So it was my assumption from that point that that was the party center office.
Thank you very much. Now, we will move on to your work in Phnom Penh. And you've already described to my colleague that your work there comprised two types of activities. One was to teach young children, 12-year-olds, in a number of areas, including telegrams, translation. And your other responsibilities included heading a telegram translation office. Now, just dealing briefly with these young people whom you taught, was it the case that they returned to the bases after they received training at the Satiru school?
Response. Some of the children were required by UNCA to help work in the bases where people with skills in telegrams were scarce. And some of them who were not capable enough even after training to decode telegrams were asked to attend another learning session, which is typing and receiving telegrams. Some even proceeded to acquire some training courses on fax, on writing or receiving fax. And some people who were very weak, they were sent to learn how to drive, to become drivers.
For those who were sent back to the bases to provide services of translating telegrams, as far as you know, did those children work in various telegram offices with which Party Centre communicated after 1975?
Response. I still recall that two children were sent to the northeast zone, one to Mundolkiri and one to Crochet province. Apart from this, with respect to other zone, those children who did not have any skills would be sent to me to be trained, and after they had received training, they would be asked to return to their bases.
Thank you. When was the first time that you conducted such a training course in Phnom Penh? You said you arrived in Phnom Penh in late 75. When was the first time that you ran a course in telegram translation?
Response. I provided training on two occasions, first in 1976 and by mid of 1977 I also lectured on another session, so 2 sessions only.
And if you recall, in those training sessions, did you have cadre from all the zones around the country or only some of the zones?
Response. No, not cadres from the zones coming to attend the training session. I thought they were children who were assigned to handle the secret coding and who had to acquire these skills. That's why they were sent to be trained under my supervision.
Thank you for correcting my use of the wrong term. Just returning to that question, do you recall if the children came from all the zones or only some parts of the country?
Response. So far as I know, not all zones would send the children to us. Only some would do.
Thank you. Now, just before we move into the actual working aspects of the telegram officers, I want to ask you the following question. You were in B20 until late 1975, continuing to work in your telegram translation unit. As far as you know, were there telegram transmission and telegram translation offices in Phnom Penh before you arrived?
Response. When I came to Phnom Penh, it was almost late 1975. So the establishment of the departments or the telegram decoding sections had already been in place. Bon and his group had arrived in Phnom Penh before I came, so he could, along with his group, been managing this to be in place already.
Now, do you know, and please tell us if you don't, whether those sections were established immediately after the leadership entered Phnom Penh, or if that only happened after some time?
Response. When you refer to the immediate arrangement, would you now be referring to the zone or to the city? But my response to you is that the arrangement could not be done immediately. Communication had to be done to different zone. When I said not immediate here, it means that everything was already in place. Communication was in place even long before the Khmer Rouge captured the city.
And now moving on to the various offices which Pon and Tay supervised in Phnom Penh. And just to help us move along more quickly, I'll read from your statement and then we will ask some questions. Again, Your Honours, returning to E3/64. The relevant ERNs are Khmer 00328-038, French 00411-699, and English 00334-049. And so I'll just read from your statement, Mr. Sapang. Quote, "My unit was under the supervision of Pon and Tay. They both also supervised the radio communication and telegram transmitting unit at the old American Embassy. Pon and Tay were the chairman of the telecommunication section, which composed of 2 units, one of which was the radio communication unit at the old American Embassy, and another was the telegram translation unit at K1, as well as my school." Looking at these units, do we understand correctly that there were 2 telegram decoding units? One was inside K1 and one was at your school or near your school. Is that a correct?
Response. Yes, it is correct. It was not near my school, it was right inside the school. At K1, Pon was in charge, but in Sotiru school, I was in charge, but I was supervised by Pon. This is how we were managed. When it comes to the telegrams work at the old American Embassy, Mr. Yuas was the one in charge. Pon and Tay were both in charge of my unit, and at the same time they were in charge of the telegram tapping and sending of the telegrams at the old American Embassy.
Thank you. So, looking at this office at the old American Embassy, which was a transmitting unit, You have just said that it was headed by someone called Yo. In your second statement, you identified him as head of K-18. Is it correct that the unit at the old American embassy was also called K-18?
Response. Yes, it is indeed correct. At the old American embassy, it was the place where telegrams would be received and transmitted. Telegrams from all across the country would be sent and transmitted from there. It is also called K-18, and Yu was the head. However, Yu was not the most superior person at K-18 because he also was supervised by Tay and Bon.
And if we can just, in a very general sense, before we discuss the details, if we can just confirm that in respect of incoming telegrams, for example, they would be received at K-18 before they were decoded at either K1 or your school. Is that an accurate description of how the incoming telegrams progressed?
Response. Yes, it is correct. And when the zones or sectors or the commander like Mr. Son Sen would like to send the messages, they would do so through K-18. At K-18, the messengers would be assigned to send the messages to K-1. And the messages would also be determined to be sent to any particular section. For example, if they needed me or my section to assist with that, then we would be asked. But if they would like to be sent to Pon, then they would do so. It means they would be sending them to Sotirua location where I was located.
Just picking up that last explanation you gave us, could you help us understand who it was that decided whether an incoming telegram would be sent to K1 for decoding or to your school?
Response. Pon was a person who had been authorized to manage telegrams. He would be the one who assigned tasks to me, for example, telegrams to be decoded by me, and the telegrams that he had to receive or be in charge. He also had to tell Yus that if it had to be sent to him, then the telegrams had to be sent to K1. And if they were destined to be sent to me, then they would send to code 38. 38 is my code. And Yus had his own code. It would be 57. So 57 here refers to K18, which was the place where telegrams would be transmitted and received.
I just want to make sure that we understand correctly. Did PON give a standing instruction as to which types of telegrams would go to K1 and which ones would come to your school? Or was that done on an ongoing basis?
Response. Indeed, he the one who made the decisions time and again. For example, on the telegrams, there would be some notes at the end with some secret coding. For example, when it referred to the east, they would mark it as A57. So in the east, it was a place where the Vietnamese invaded. And at that location, it was the very important location that the telegrams would be addressed to, and it had to be decoded at K1. For telegrams that had to be sent to other areas that were no serious conflicts, then I would be in charge of decoding.
And just to complete the journey of an incoming telegram, it has been received by K18 and it is delivered to you or to PON's office, as the case may be. At that point, either you or PON's office will decode that telegram. And what happens then?
Response. After decoding this into the Khmer text or Khmer telegrams, we then typed the text, and I would then place them into the envelopes, and the recipient would be K1. When we refer to K1 here, it was PON who would be our target recipient, and he would manage from there.
When you say your target would be K1, were there telegrams which were addressed to other officers in Phnom Penh?
Response. When you were asking about incoming telegrams, first they came in as code, and then it would be decoded into letters or texts. After that, I wish to also make it clear that these messages would not be sent to people in Phnom Penh, but they would be sent to the leaders, they would not be sent to various ministries. When they were sent to K1, it suggests that Pon would be the one who managed to have them sent or delivered to the leaders.
Thank you. We might come back to that issue and explore it in more detail. Just for now, can we also look briefly at outgoing telegrams in this period? And perhaps here again, in the interest of time, I'll read from your statement, and then we can discuss it in more detail. Your Honours, this is again in E3/64, and the relevant ERNs Khmer 00328-030, French 00411-699, English 00334049, and this is how you described the process, Mr. Sapang. Quote, if the Committee 870 wanted to send a message out, Pon and Tay would go in person to get it from them. They went to take note of the words of the Committee 870 and then took the handwriting message to the telegram translation group to have its text coded. After it was coded, the message was given to my personal messenger or the messenger at K1 to take to the radio communication at the old American embassy. Yo, who was in charge of the radio communication unit there, would manage to get the message to be transmitted to its respective destination. And lastly, the message that was sent out by the radio communication unit was in code numbers, since its text had been coded by the translator group, and the receiver unit would receive it in code numbers format. So just coming back to that, I want to make sure that we have this correct. Outgoing messages would be handwritten by Pon and Tay based on instruction, and they were then coded either by translators at K1 or by you and your staff at the school. And is that correct?
Response: yes, it is, because this was the part of the practice so far. When the Center Committee needed anything, then Pon would be summoned to take notes. When instructions would be wished to send to different zones and sector, after obtaining the messages, he would then submit them to people at respective unit, for example at K1, where the text would be then re-decoded. The full message would never be sent straightforward. It had to be converted into secret coding. So all had to be converted into secret coding. Even at my place, if I was needed for decoding the telegrams, I had to also read the code into more secret coding. It was several layers of decoding these secret telegrams, and it was really complicated. It will take me the whole day to explain the process, and it's really very complex.
We understand it's a very complex subject matter, and thank you for assisting us. We're not going to go into that degree of detail. You'll be glad to know. Now, we discussed incoming telegrams and outgoing telegrams. Are you able to estimate, based on your recollection, approximately how many incoming telegrams your office or your school would have translated on any given day?
Response. During the period of when the country was liberated, we had to decode a lot of telegrams. We had to work days and nights. However, after Phnom Penh was liberated, the workload has reduced dramatically. But on average, on any given day, we would be decoding about 4 to 10 telegrams.
This was with respect to the incoming telegrams. Do you recall, on average, how many outgoing telegrams you would have?
Response. Concerning the outgoing telegrams, we did not have a lot of outgoing telegrams anyway. At that time, we had very brief or short telegrams that we had to send out. And mainly, the telegrams were more about distribution of the goods that Mr. Kyusampon would like them to be distributed to the bases. Whenever he would like the goods to be distributed, he would send the telegrams to our unit so that the other part or the other side of the communication channel would be expecting the goods to be delivered, the amount of goods to be delivered.
Do you recall how often such telegrams were sent by Mr. Kyusampan? Was it on a daily basis? Was it once a week or a month or more often, if you do recall?
Not that often. It was once in every 10 days. But if we combined the incoming and outgoing telegrams from different regions or zones, then there were many telegrams coming in and going out. Even those, it came in once every 10 days or so, but if all the zone had to receive the telegrams, then there were many to be sent out.
I'd like to look briefly at the issue of transmission to and from the zones. You said to us that prior to 1975 there were telegrams from zones and autonomous sectors. Was that also the case after April 1975 when you worked in Phnom Penh?
But ការ
Well, the organization of the zones and sectors were the same as the period before 1975, except one telegram unit relating to the special zone, because special zone was in Phnom Penh, but it was, of course, the case in terms of telegrams organization. It was like what we did prior to 1975.
And did that communication by telegram continue for the entire period that you were in Phnom Penh?
Response. Yes, it did. It did continue until the date when the Vietnamese came to Phnom Penh.
Thank you. Focusing in on the issue of actual transmissions for a brief moment, I'd like to look at your second statement and see if you can assist us with some of these details. Your Honours, this is document E3/67, and the passage I will be referring to is at Khmer ERN 00294-542, French 00374-938, and English 00483-971. And this is what you said, Mr. Sapan, quote, "In communicating with Committee 870, they had their own timing. For example, in one zone, one had to make contact at 7 a.m., 10 a.m., or 1 p.m., 1900 hours. This is an example of one zone. The other zones were all the same. Do I understand correctly that each zone was allocated or assigned specific times during a day during which they could transmit coded telegrams to, or coded messages to K18?
Yes, that is correct. The communication through radio broadcast was in accordance with the time of the day, unless we are on air together, that we could communicate with each other.
គ្រប់កន្លែងគឺសុទ្ធតែមាន
Radio corrects interpreters the radio communication instead. So all the zones had to allocate the times when they had to contact each other. So they organized with each other as to when they could communicate with one another. Sometimes it took place once every day or twice or so every day.
And I just want to make sure that I understand correctly your answer. Were you describing telegrams between zones, for example, between the east zone and the west zone, or was that a description of a telegram from a zone to K18? Just want to make sure I understand.
As far as the decoding work was concerned, Pon and I had to decode the messages as they deemed necessary. We decoded messages from sectors and zones, but in certain circumstances when there were busy schedule going on in other zones, for example in the east zone or northeast zone, then the message was to be given to me, but due to the pressing circumstance, then we had to communicate very quickly. So even if I was handling the document, but that document will be taken away from me and submitted to K1 for immediate decision. So we had to be flexible as well at the time, depending on the circumstance.
I'm not sure you answered my question. It probably was confusing. My question was whether, in describing those specific times that you talked about earlier for each zone, whether zones were sending telegrams to each other, whether there were telegrams, for example, from the east zone directly to the west zone.
The communication between zones and zone, I did not know. I only received the message that was sent from the zone through my unit, telegram unit. That's what I knew.
Thank you for clarifying that. Was it the case that radio communication between K18 and the zones was available and functioning at all times, 24 hours a day, or was the service more limited?
បាទ
The communication through radio communication between K18 and zones were in accordance with the time indicated for the radio communication, as I said earlier. Sometimes such communication took place 3 times per day or twice per day or once per day, depending on the actual circumstance at the time. However, if the circumstance justified, then they could agree with each other that we did not have to communicate at the designated times. We could meet any time of the day, 24 hours per day.
And as far as you knew at the time, through your work, were telegrams that were being sent out from K18, were they always received by the various zones or other offices to which they were being sent?
Response. That I do not know. I dare not say that I was sure that those telegrams reached those zones or offices. And in addition, it was sent through this technology, and I did not know whether or not they reached the target recipients, and in addition, whether or not the person who had to forward the information did it. The President. Thank you, witness, and thank you, prosecutor. It is time now to adjourn for the day, since we did not have the break in between this afternoon session. But before we break, we would like to ask the defense team for Mr. Ieng Sari. Tomorrow, we are going to hear the fitness to stand trial by Ms. Ieng Thirit. And the 2 accused were not supposed to attend the hearing. However, Mr. Ieng Sari, due to his marriage relationship with Madam Ieng Thirit, so I would like to ask the defense team for Mr. Ieng Sari whether or not Mr. Ieng Sari intends to participate in tomorrow's hearing and the day after tomorrow as well. Counsel Angadam. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. Good afternoon, colleagues, everyone in and around the courtroom. Concerning the hearing on the fitness to stand trial of Ms. Ieng Thirit, my colleagues and I will divide our task. I will be here alone. However, Mr. Michael Canavas, he had another commitment to prepare for the other witnesses, so he will not be here. And as for Mr. Ieng Sari, he will participate in the proceedings. However, he would like to remain in the holding cell downstairs. The President. Thank you very much for your information. And the time is now appropriate for the day adjournment. And as for the hearing of the testimony by Mr. Nong Pong will resume on Monday next week, starting from 9 o'clock in the morning. The Monday's hearings will begin with the questions by the prosecution. And Mr. Nong Supong, your testimony has not yet come to an end, so the chamber invites you to come to testify in this court on Monday next week. Court officer is instructed to facilitate the transport and accommodation for witness Nong Supong and have him back before the chamber by 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday next week. The chamber wishes to advise parties and members of the public that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, the chamber will conduct the hearing on the reassessment of the fitness to stand trial by Madame Ieng Theret, and we will have the report by expert concerning the reassessments of her fitness to stand trial, and the chamber will start at 10:30 since we are waiting for the International Counsel for Madame Ieng Theret. Madame Diana Ellis will arrive in the International Phnom Penh Airport at 10 o'clock this morning. Tomorrow, rather. So, since tomorrow hearing is dedicated to Madame Ieng Theret, the two defense team for Mr. Khieu Samphan and Mr. Nguyen Chia need not be present in the courtroom. Security guards are instructed now to bring the co-accused, Mr. Nguyen Chia, Ieng Sari, Khieu Samphan, back to the detention facility and have them back to the courtroom on Monday next week before 9 o'clock. However, tomorrow, the 30th of August, for the interest of justice, the security guards are instructed to bring Madame Ieng Theret to this courtroom, and Mr. Ieng Sari will remain in the holding cell downstairs to follow the proceeding by audio-visual means.